Hi there, gentle folks. Welcome back to Real Talk, a space where psychology meets culture, community, and unapologetic truth. We are Dr. Denise Watkins and Dr. Erika Dawkins, two Black psych types at different stages of our careers, and we're here to unpack the real life issues that impact our mental health, relationships, and resilience in a revolutionary way. From trauma to triumph, therapy to theology, we hold space for healing, growth, and the conversations we feel our communities deserve. This is Real Talk. Raw, relevant, revolutionary, and rooted in love. And today we are going to be talking about, so you want to be a clinical psychologist, or you think so, and hopefully walking through both our experiences and some of the technical things that are necessary to reach that point in your career. And so we think that it is really important. The rate of Black psychologists is pretty low. There's about a 5% of all licensed psychologists that are Black. And so we need more psychologists in the field, not only for the contributions and the unique contributions that can be made, but also for the support that can be provided. And so we'll hope to share a little bit about our experiences, our paths, and then what you will need practically to be able to achieve that goal. So I wonder, Dr. Watkins, would you like to start a little bit about kind of your path here?
Yeah. So just to say, Widener was one of the schools that stuck out to me when I was searching for schools in the tri-state area. And I was completing my undergrad at Penn State. And so I wanted something in Pennsylvania, and Widener was one of the many places that I interviewed and was accepted. And so, yeah, my experience of that is very interesting, and one I'm hoping to openly share with others in hopes of giving them some information about how they might want to proceed in that process.
So before I share a little bit about my experience, what made you want to be a psychologist?
Oh, I mean, so many things. Personal, and I'd say maybe just in general, recognizing what might be something that could benefit my community and could benefit maybe the larger society. I always had an interest in psychology from, I guess maybe high school was the first time when I took a Psych 101. And, when I went into undergrad, I was like wanting to possibly be a nurse, but I took a college level Psych 101 and I was like, oh no, this is the thing that I really love. So it really was, I think, also some of the personal experiences I've had in my life and my family in which I was, touched by psychology and seeing how being in psychology can really benefit so many different people in so many different ways. And so that's really what inspired me.
That's fair. I ask because I feel like while all of our stories may be a little different, there's always, it seems to be in my experience, both as a student kind of moving into graduate school and now on the other side as faculty, reading personal statements and things like that as students applying, is there's always like a personal element,
Yes.
a problem solving bit, something where we've experienced the impact and influence of psychology at some point in our lives and desire to make our own contribution to the field. And so similarly, I grew up with psychology and mental health as an influence in my family, with most of the members in my family navigating some mental health diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And then in high school as well, wanted to take an AP course. And the faculty at the time, I won't call them by name, but said that they would not give me permission to take the AP course in psychology, but they would honors, because they felt like I would not be successful in the course, right? Okay, yeah, talk about growing up in the South and microaggressions and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Took the course, enjoyed it, went to undergrad, and in undergrad was involved in the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Program, which is a program that for folks in undergrad starts to help you prepare for what it's like to go to graduate school. So
Awesome.
You enter the program with the knowledge that you're in a field that would require some graduate education and to be able to support you with understanding what research is like and then to help with applications and things like that.
Oh.
So as a sophomore, I already knew that the plan was to continue with graduate school. Therefore, then as a junior, was able to start applying to schools and really then thinking about the difference between a PhD and a PsyD, and ultimately chose the PsyD. And so it's just interesting to kind of see all of the different tracks.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing that you had that experience. See, I just got told like in junior year, like, what do you plan on doing? And I was like, oh yeah, grad school. So I'm glad that you had that like kind of shaping and influence that really led you forward into the next stage. That's
Absolutely.
really awesome.
Yeah, it was really helpful to be involved in labs in undergrad with faculty that, of course, had their doctorate and were talking about the different things that could be done in the field. I think at a research institution like Howard, though, a lot of folks were PhDs, they were focused on research,
Yes.
there weren't practitioners. And so I did have to do some outside work and also some convincing with my primary lab faculty about going the PsyD route over the PhD route.
Yeah, yeah. See, that's interesting because I had the same experience at Penn State, very research focused, and my mentor there was a PhD. And I told him, I'd really love to be a doctor. And he's like, well, I don't know anything about clinical, but I'll help you as much as I can. And so, yes, I can sympathize and also empathize with that experience of like being around, I guess, maybe research focused minds and wanting to kind of switch to that clinical route.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed like there was a lot of information out there, but having to go out and seek it, especially around things like cost. I don't know about what your undergraduate experience was like, but I went to undergraduate and through undergraduate on scholarship, did not have to take out loans until like that final year where it's like, oh, you've got to travel to interviews, you've got to apply. It's like, oh my gosh. And I think that was the first time I actually then had to take out loans and then start to think about the fact that if I didn't choose a PhD, it's possible that grad school was not going to be covered. And what was that going to look like in terms of expense and planning? Yep. And so maybe it's helpful for us to talk about the difference between PsyD and PhD and what that means in terms of like cost and what led to maybe you making the decision for PsyD versus PhD.
Well, I will say I was really thinking possibly to go PhD, and obviously UPenn, one of the prestigious Ivies in Pennsylvania, was one of the options. But then I saw the GRE score you needed to have, and I was like, oh goodness, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to that level that they're looking for. And so I was like, well, let me just look into the alternatives in the area. And so Widener came up. There was also PCOM, Chestnut Hill, Westchester, and these programs weren't PhD, they were PsyD. Obviously, if I could have had my education funded, I would have loved that. And in undergrad, I only had to take out very menial loans because I was on scholarship and, I also had money coming from a job and things like that. So it really helped. But, seeing the prices and knowing that I was probably going to be walking away with upwards of $150 or maybe close to $200,000 worth of loans, it did kind of nerve me. But, my mom really was in the background just saying, well, you'll pay it. Yeah. You'll pay it, right? You're going to be a doctor. You'll be able to pay it. And so having that encouragement of like not letting the financial price kind of like deter me, it really drove me forward to say, I'm just going to interview with the schools that are in the area that accept me for interview. And if I get a PhD or a PsyD program, then I can make the decision about what is best. And fortunately, all of the programs were PsyD. So I ended up going the more clinical route, and I don't regret that at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm wondering, so it sounds like your focus was more staying in the area. Were there any other factors that you were looking for, like specialty, training experiences, anything else that helped make the difference for you?
So I do have a background in research because when I was at Penn State, I was originally a BS, but then late in the game, I switched to a BA to avoid math classes. And so I did a thesis in which I created a measure. So I did have research experience, and I knew that was imperative for both types. It would be helpful to have that on your CV. And then really I knew always that I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and I figured you'd still be able to do that whether you had PhD or PsyD. But when I saw what Widener was offering, and then also some of the other schools, Westchester was also offering a great experience around internship and training. You would spend I think full-time amounts of work with your internship. That really intrigued me because I wanted to get out into the field. All of what I had did thus far was very academic focused, very research lab kind of things, and I wanted to be in the mix of the the work in the trenches, And so I was like, this is great that I could be out here doing lovely research in a lab somewhere, but I really wanted to expand on clinical. After I graduated from undergrad, I did work inside of a TMS clinic, and I think working there for the year leading up into applications, it really invigorated me to be like, I love this. I love the work, being with people and seeing them blossom and get better and heal, And so that's really what let me know that clinical was where I desired to be and maybe where I was meant to be.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as someone who's not originally from Pennsylvania and was going to school in DC, some of the things that I had to consider was, locale and of course moving again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also really important to me. I knew at that time a lot of the research that I'd done in undergrad was focused on intra and interpersonal relationships, which led me to desire to work in human sexuality as well, thinking about doing couples work, thinking about, kind of working with Black and brown women and understanding the sexuality component to that. And so I was very strategic in terms of looking at programs across the country and, kind of saying like, I'll go anywhere to get the appropriate training.
Awesome.
But, really focusing on programs that had the clinical and sexuality focuses. And so that led me to apply at like the Florida Institute for Technology at Regent University in Virginia, here at Widener. I also applied to Chestnut Hill because there was a faculty there that was interested in sexuality. I think Chicago School for Professional Psychology, Alliant University. So I was bouncing all around. And there's a program at Baylor, a PsyD program that's actually fully funded. And so hearing about Baylor's program, even though they did not have a sexuality faculty, looking at kind of not incurring debt was one of the reasons that I applied to that program, even though it's very competitive. And then ultimately landed on Widener for two reasons. One, the exclusively affiliated integrated internship, which essentially means if you're accepted to a program that has that affiliation, the program itself is APA accredited and the internship. And if you're accepted into the program, you're guaranteed an internship. And an internship is what you need post-training in terms of your academic training to be able to sit for licensure. You need so many hours of internship training and in some states a postdoc as well to be able to be fully licensed. And so this idea that after my training I wasn't going to have to pick up and fly across the country for internship, but could remain here in Pennsylvania and do it part-time over 2 years sold me on Widener's program and the dual degree.
Yeah, that was the selling point for me. It was like, hey, the internship is here. And when we were coming in, you were supposed to be able to get that very first year. Unfortunately, I was a COVID baby and started in 2020, so that was taken away. But at the time, that was really the thing that made me want to be here. Was like, I'm going to get right out there working in the very first year.
Absolutely. All 5 years. And I would have come in 2008. And at the time, it was still a 5-year training model. And so we had about a month to prepare in class, and then we went out to practicum. It was like, here, get out there, do the work, which I think that has its pros and cons, right? But really appreciated that. And so research and the difference between like PsyD and PhD is a lot of that research component, that funding component. So a PsyD is considered to be like a practitioner degree, like a law degree or a medical school degree, where you essentially are paying for it, and there's more clinical experience and practical experience than there is research experience. The biggest components of the research, unless you seek external opportunities, are going to come in the form of your dissertation, which can be theoretical or empirical, either quantitative or qualitative. But that's kind of the culminating project of all doctoral degrees, like PhDs and PsyDs.
Yeah. And then what about the final clinical oral exam?
Yeah, so for us, our program is somewhat unique in that we structured a culminating event. So there are two, the dissertation, and then what we call FCO, or a final clinical oral exam. And it's actually structured after what is required for board certification as psychologists. A number of our faculty that started the program were board certified in clinical psychology and family and marriage therapy. And so they structured the FCO, which is essentially a presentation of an assessment case or an intervention case to a jury or kind of like group of peers. You submit a recording of a case or the raw data from an assessment, and essentially have to defend your work and demonstrate why you came up with the diagnoses and or recommendations or treatment plan that you did. And it is what we see as the evidence of your training over the past 5 years.
Yeah. It was a very interesting experience. but one that I look back on very fondly, and kind of am glad that I had, because like Erika, Dr. Dawkins said, is that, that is something that could prepare you for a later experience, a board certification. That's something that I'm thinking of seeking of doing with the encouragement of my mentor and supervisor. So, I'm glad that I had that experience, because it will prepare me for a future experience that I will have.
Absolutely. And so all the programs are structured a little differently, and so looking at not only what the program provides in terms of faculty areas of interest or training tracks, like clinical, like neuropsychology, like organizational and developmental psychology, criminal justice, or forensic psychology, are all things to consider, and things like the expense or even what it takes to get into the program and what you can expect moving through the program are all things to consider when applying to programs and continuing education in that way.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned GREs being kind of a deciding factor for you when applying.
Yes.
And so do you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the other things in the application, but the GREs included, and kind of like what was beneficial to you to understand about that part of the process?
Yes. So right away, I think this was around junior year, leading up to me, preparing a thesis and all of that. My mentor had told me, there's a graduate entrance exam that most schools require you to take. And he said, you should probably go take it one time right now before you even are going to put applications out, just to see where you land. Because if you need to prep and improve your score by the time you want to apply next year, you'd like to give yourself the time and opportunity to do that. And so when I went, I, got a score that was somewhat okay, but definitely on the lower end, and probably would not have paired very well with all the other things that were going into my application. And so, when I came back and told my mentor this, he said, okay, no worries, we're going to get you something that you can prep with. So I Googled and looked for different types of prep, and I actually found this one called Magoosh. It was lovely. It was self kind of taught, and you could pick what amount of time you wanted to spend. I think I went about 6 months with it, and I did it right after I graduated, and so I did it through the summer, and it really helped me. It guaranteed that you'd have a 10-point increase. I had more than a 10-point increase.
Okay.
And so I fell in the range that most of the schools, the applications, that their requirements, I fell in the range where I could think that I would possibly be accepted once I did the other requirements, like the writing of the personal statements, the CVs, showing maybe what my experience was after undergrad. And so, what I will say is that getting prepared for the GRE can be a little daunting, but give yourself grace. It's not as, maybe important as the other pieces of the interview materials, but definitely still put your best foot forward. Give yourself an opportunity to improve if you think you need it, and be open to exploring, what options might be out there if you might not make it to a specific score. And even if you do make it to a certain score, know that sometimes that can be overlooked for other things that are in your applications.
Absolutely. I think you make a great point, not only about the general GRE, but making note of like what else the school might require in terms of examination prior to coming in. Some schools require like the GRE 2 or like an additional like psychology related GRE, and not all schools do, so it's helpful to make note of that. But like you mentioned, there are other elements, your personal statements, and so there are going to be specific questions that each application is going to ask about why you're interested in psychology, to get some sense of what you can make as far as your contribution to the field if a training program takes you on. They'll also be interested in something called your CV or your curriculum vitae, and that's an opportunity for you to talk about your educational and academic and training opportunities. And it's a little different than a resume. Your resume just has your work experience and who can be contacted, maybe some of the roles and responsibilities that you held while working. A CV is going to outline other professional roles that you maybe had in organizations like sororities or clubs, responsibilities that you had as part of a research lab, any volunteer experience that you've done, and is really going to give a program a sense of what we would call transferable skills that you have. So even if you didn't take kind of a gap year like Denise did and do work in a psychological setting, that's not required, but a lot of programs are looking for transferable skills that folks would have coming straight from undergrad into grad school.
Yeah, so even if you won awards, things like being at the top of your class, right? Magna or summa cum laude, or even publications
Mhm.
or articles that you could have written prior to coming in. Those are all really important things that could make you look as even better as a candidate in comparison to something like a GRE score. So I did have some of those areas, packed out,
Mhm.
and I think that really kind of maybe helped my chances. Who knows? But
Absolutely.
maybe.
Yeah, because programs are looking at that in its entirety,
Mhm.
right? As someone who is part of the faculty that reviews applications, there are a number of aspects to the application, and we just happen to develop a rating system here
Mhm.
where we can provide a certain number of points to each element in what we ask for students, and are looking for certain things like clarity, like writing skills, or even emphasis in a recommendation. And so it makes me think about, just wanting to make sure that there's clear understanding of some of the coursework that you might need to take before applying, or really making sure that you have strong faculty relationships, that you're not just, I don't know, going to class and being in the back somewhere, but that
Mhm.
professors know you, even if you're not going to be involved in things like a lab, but that the work that you do in their class is evidence of your desire to continue in the field, so that there can be strong letters of recommendation written. So maybe we can talk a little bit about like what could be considered an application and how that might prepare.
Yes, things that you should be looking to include in your package. Yes, a personal statement. When I thought about writing this, I was a little nervous.
Yeah.
Being open and authentic about why you want to be a psychologist or what drove you to the field can feel a little like nerve wracking or daunting, because how much information are you supposed to,
Right.
include, right? Am I supposed to tell my whole life story? I don't know, right? And so thankfully, my mentor came in again, wonderful person, Dr. Russell Webster. He came into this with me allowing him to read my personal statement after I read it. And of course, he, said a couple tweaks here, take this out, add this. But one of the things that he reminded me was of who I am and my identity factors, and how, I should use them to my benefit, right? I am obviously a Black female, and of course, we know, like what was said in the beginning of this, that there are a lack of Black clinicians, and especially Black female clinicians. And so, wanting to really expound on the desire to be part of the growth of the field, and to also turn around and give back to the community in hopes of bringing other young Black individuals into the field as well. So that definitely is something I think that kind of helped me really shape and write a personal statement that I hope was captivating.
Absolutely.
I assume was captivating.
Proof that it was captivating.
Yes, you're right. And so, take your time with that. Be thoughtful and mindful about what you're including. Don't give too much, but don't be scared to be authentic and real about what it is that influences your desire to be a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a great point that even if you're not 100% sure what the direction is, because there's so many different directions, and I think about a generalist program like Widener, it's so broad that you might say, I know I want to make an impact, but I don't know enough about what I could make an impact, or ways in which I could get involved, or the different areas of psychology. I think even with APA, there's something like over 60 divisions, right? With the division of women in psychology, and of psychology and technology, and aesthetic psychology. There's so much that it's even okay to be generalist and come in and say, I'm not 100% sure, but here's what I think I can contribute. And so you make a really good point. And then it sounds like even the articulation of who you are should kind of flow through those other elements too. And I would agree with that, like being able to see some level of agreement with your CV, and then in those recommendation letters. And I don't think I can emphasize enough getting strong letters of recommendation, not just saying like, can you write me a letter of recommendation? I always encourage students like strong, like couple pages, not going to necessarily have you write it and they just sign it. But that they really can speak to what you're capable of, and have you kind of jump off the page. I feel like that's always so nice for me when I read letters of recommendation. It's like, oh, I feel like I know this student. That this student just really shines through the way that other people are able to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I for sure was one of the other things that I, expounded on, was making sure I used the connections that I had made while I was at undergrad, and even when I took the gap year and was working, made sure that those connections helped me, and they sure did, with helping to capture who you are and what you can bring to the table in a way that's really invigorating for your process.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know one of the things that is included in our application that's not really unique to a lot of applications is kind of the advent of diversity. It's one of the things that's important in our field, regardless of what's happening in the current climate right now in 2025 absolutely. When this is being recorded. But APA is still committed to minoritized and marginalized demographics that we might serve and embody in the presentation and representation as far as psychologists. And so you may be asked to write, in addition to a personal statement, diversity statement, and it's important that you think about your identity characteristics. Yes. We oftentimes talk about and use the addressing framework and to be able to define difference in terms of identity characteristics like age, developmental and acquired disabilities, race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, religious orientation, indigenous heritage, national origin, as well as gender, as the ways in which we think about identity positioning. But other things like political positioning and body positioning all are included as far as identity characteristics.
And where you live.
And where you live, right? Like regionally. So all things that you might consider that might be unique or that might really play into the importance of you receiving training as a psychologist that you can speak to. But being authentic and not reaching for what you feel like folks might want to hear, but really talking about what's present and focusing on your identity can be really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I'll also say from the point of a person that reviews applications should be really important is making sure that you get those things in on time. They will not be reviewed and if they're late, as well as that they have all of the elements. And that if there are things that you might need to do to like improve your GPA, so if the application requires a minimum of a 2.75 or a 3.0, you might want to take a couple of classes to raise that up because a lot of systems and institutions like a university use software to kind of weed out those criteria that aren't met. And so a application won't even get to a faculty if it's not meeting the minimum requirements. And so I think that can be helpful to know as well.
Yes, make sure that you read, when you're going and looking for these schools, they give you direct instructions about what is to be expected. And so just giving yourself that opportunity of making sure you hit all of those points is going to also boost your chances. So.
And then lastly, maybe the cost of applications. So making sure that you're ready. There's always a fee, capitalism, right? So, there's a fee attached to applying and some consortiums or groups of universities have like joint fees. And so if you're applying oftentimes to PhD programs, they may be grouped within this consortium and you pay one fee and can apply to multiple universities. But often if you're looking for programs that maybe fit very special needs, you're going to be applying and then paying that application fee for each application that you're submitting. And usually to be able to make sure the odds of getting an interview are in your favor, you want to apply usually between 5 to 7 programs because it can be really competitive.
Yes, exactly what I was going to say is like definitely at least 6. That's where I landed. But if you have the opportunity to do up to 7 or even a little bit more, that's always going to help you. One of the other things is to kind of look out if there are ways for fees to be waived.
Yes.
Because being an undergrad at Penn State, they had a doctoral program. And when I applied, because I was a student there, that fee was waived. So it's always good to research and see if there are schools who maybe have some kind of way to wiggle that for you and make it just a little less expensive.
That any way to cut costs.
Yes.
Costs and not corners. Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
All right, so after you apply, then it's interview time. So thinking about kind of if you are offered an interview, the fact that not everyone gets an interview and that sometimes there are, kind of outright rejections. And then there's the kind of like a wait list piece. And so I remember moving through all of the universities that I applied to and getting, kind of notice of interview because that's another potential expense. If they can do the interview via Zoom, great. But a lot of or programs ask that you come in person for interview, and having to factor in flights and hotels and meals or travel is something to really think about.
Yeah, so when I, again, was searching, I knew that I was going to be staying here in the state for a number of different reasons. And so, my comfortability with traveling was like at least driving distance, right? So if I had to drive maybe up to 3 or 4 hours, I was totally okay with that. But I ended up applying to schools that were all within maybe an hour to an hour and a half drive distance from my home. That's also great in the sense of thinking about when you are accepted, what your commute would be like, right? And so thankfully, all of the schools that I applied to, I did receive an interview to, and I attended all of them except one, and that's only because the interview process occurred later than normal. And by that time, Widener had given me an acceptance, and I was so enthralled, I said yes. So I didn't even get the chance to interview at one of the schools I applied to. But one of the things that I think I was so nervous about is like, what are they going to want to know? And of course, my mentor had told me like what his experience was. But again, because he was a PhD, it was much different, the kinds of questions that they would want to ask. I went out and I looked like, what would you expect for a clinical? And I found a list of questions. I also looked through people's experiences like on Reddit and other blog sites where people were talking about, what it was like to go, and, how to maybe even approach it, how to dress, what you should do and not do, right? Like, don't smell like maybe cigarette smoke, or don't, maybe come under the influence of anything, right? But just make sure that, like, you prepare yourself to a level where you can show up as your best, not over prepped, not under prepped, but just ready to give your all. Because sometimes it's an all day affair depending upon what kind of interview it is.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice, that, you don't have to memorize any, diagnostic criteria. There's not going to be a quiz. It's really an opportunity to be able to show what you can bring once you've been trained.
Absolutely.
And so being able to go into the setting relaxed and, kind of authentically makes a lot of sense. And knowing that at most programs, of course, we can only speak for the experience that we had here at Widener, but there's going to be some individual component, like a one-on-one with the faculty, potentially the faculty that you've noted that you have interest in working with at the university in your application. There's going to be some group component, because if it's a half-day or all-day thing, it's impossible to do a bunch of one-on-ones, right? And then there's going to be some, like, opportunity to think critically. So you're not just answering questions about yourself, but we have over the years had some questions that demonstrate your thoughtfulness in the field. So whether that's through a clinical vignette, or for you problem solving and talking through adversity that you've had in your own life and how you've been able to navigate that. It has been a helpful marker, I think, as a student to be able to think about how to shine, but also as a faculty member, giving some insight into ways that students present.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I thought about from when I was at Widener was just kind of like managing, like, how much do I want to talk and not talk to? Because I'm a bit of an introvert, maybe an omnivert.
Sure.
But I find myself sometimes wanting to speak a lot, and then other times kind of wanting to play the back. And I think I did a little bit of both that day, right? I watched and observed, but I also snuck in when I thought it was time. And, think about that. Think about your personality and, like, what feels comfortable for you, and try to actually do that, but maybe step a little bit forward if you're used to the back, or if you're playing the back, observe what might be happening in the room that could be something you can use to your advantage. So,
absolutely. Yeah. And, bring snacks.
That too.
Because like you said, it might be water, it might be an all-day process. If there's, something that you need to have some comforts, like a jacket. I'm someone who tends to get cold and know that I don't present well. I start to shut down and get sleepy. So I definitely want to make sure I'm warm in settings because it may be an all-day affair. And then one of the things that I've always leaned on, whether it's interview for grad school or even jobs, is like sending some note and personalized note after the interview, right?
Absolutely.
I'm a fan of handwritten, and so I tend to do that. But, being able to send an email, just thanking the faculty and any staff that are present or that you engage with for their time, not asking any questions about the process, but maybe reiterating your interests, and, kind of talking about the experience itself is always a good look.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't hurt to get that information and to follow up. No matter what the outcome is, it would be remembered that you made that effort.
Absolutely. And so then usually there's a process that each program walks through, and usually there are multiple interview days, and sometimes they communicate that, but a full on decision or all the final decisions aren't usually made until the last interview day. If the program knows that for whatever reason that you would not meet the criteria, then they would send out notification of a rejection at that time. And if you are not receiving communication readily, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a decision, but potentially that there are more interview days to be able to be had. It's really important that if there is a waitlist communication or a deferment, like not this year, but maybe next year, or an outright rejection, that you definitely receive it with grace. It's okay to ask for feedback from the admissions committee or from the program. It makes sense because it helps with your other interviews potentially, or even if you'd like to reapply to the program in the future. But definitely try to accept them with grace.
Absolutely, yeah. It can be tough,
yes,
I'm sure, but it's a learning experience, and one door may close, but another one may open.
Absolutely.
So sometimes rejection is redirection.
Come on.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, and I think about even as you move through a program, right? Like there are, that interview and, the start is just the start, right? Like there's the whole actual process of going through. And there's so many things that you'll have to weather and navigate that are going to be new and unique to this graduate process. I think any person with an advanced degree that I've talked to has talked about like both the hell and the benefit. And so it really starts with the application period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to learn a lot of things and you're going to change over time. I would want to bet money if you don't change, there's something going on there, but you are going to see changes and be open to like the adaptation that comes out of it, because it's only for your better growth, your professional growth, your personal growth.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that our conversation up until this point has been general about like the grad school process and application process. And I'd be remiss without acknowledging the uniqueness of needs for Black and Brown folks entering a space.
Yes.
Most graduate spaces feel like predominantly white spaces, even if they are held at HBCU institutions, right? Because there's a level of access when we're talking about graduate education and different SES factors that have to be, present to be able to move through some spaces.
Yeah.
And so am not, kind of ignorant to what it takes for folks to get there. And what it makes me think about are some of the messages that I felt like not only I had to combat for myself, but in other people, to be able to move through this space successfully, and some of the supports that were needed. And so maybe we can kind of close out our time talking about that, providing some encouragement to folks that may be battling with that amongst themselves or people in their life. And not only just be sitting proof that it can be done.
Yeah. I mean, well, psychology historically was a white profession, and I think in maybe the last 30, 40 years, it's become more diverse, but still predominantly white. And so, like Erika, Dr. Dawkins said, is that, we would be very, I think, remiss to not address that there are going to be times where you may feel you don't belong, but that's not true. And the imposter syndrome. One of the things that was so helpful was Psych Noir. There was a group here helmed by Erika, and I mean, I don't know what it would have been like for me if I didn't have that level of solidarity with a number of different students from different years. There were people who were graduating when I came in, and there were people who were in the midpoints, and then people who were just starting with me. And I think just being able to be in that level of solidarity with other Black students from different walks of life, different worlds, different genders, colors, creeds, everything. It really helped me to feel like I am supposed to be here and I can move forward, and then also just the imposter syndrome that might come up. There are going to be many times where you question your abilities, or, are you going to make it? Is this what you want to do? Did you make the right decision? And when those questions do come up, I think you should lean in and reflect and go deep. Make sure that you are, solid in the journey and that you want to continue. But do not let anyone discourage you or make you feel like you are too anything or not enough of anything to be here, because neither one of those statements are true. And just the fact that you even took the step to come forward into it shows that that's where you should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that finding common and community spaces can be really important as a marginalized, minoritized individual in higher education. Again, higher education is meant to be kind of a gatekeeping space. And like you said, if it is already historically been to, kind of only spaces that are white-centered, male-centered spaces, then those experiences of non-white, non-male individuals are going to be more challenging. I think one of the things that I was grateful for, not only in having Psych Noir myself once I arrived here at Widener, but thinking about the ways that folks poured into me at Howard. So, the decision to go to an HBCU was mine. I feel like if Howard had the same program as Widener, I just want to say, I just would have stayed. So it was a culture shock coming here to Widener and not being able to have these conversations that we could have intellectually, knowing that we were talking about just essentially the impact on Black people, right? Like that always had to be added to conversations, and then having to provide context where that didn't have to happen in this other space was something that took a lot of getting used to. And it was important for me, on top of the academic rigor, on top of the expectation with the practicum experiences and learning these clinical skills, I was I need community to do that well. I cannot do that solo. Because I was so used to not only coming from the South and having that, but having come straight from an undergraduate group that was so rich and warm and, kind of encouraging. It's interesting, and I've thought about this, and maybe I'll revisit this in a PWI academic space. The title doctor is reserved for folks until they graduate. But I felt like one of the things that was most empowering about my time at Howard is it didn't matter which lab I was in. Both Dr. Roberts and Dr. Winston, which are the two labs that I worked under, would call everyone in their lab Dr. Whoever. And it was almost just affirming that you can do this. You will do this. It is, foreshadowing your future, where we expect for you to go. And it was something that just always really sat with me, in the common space, everybody was equal in that way. And really appreciated, kind of having that and being able to lean back on that when feeling like maybe I shouldn't be here, or maybe, I can't do the work at that graduate level. Getting that encouragement was super helpful.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, I felt it in my chest when you said that. It's very powerful. I mean, to be accepted by your higher colleagues and to be acknowledged in that manner, I think makes you feel like you can step right into your power, right?
Absolutely.
So
yeah. And so I think when deciding on programs, really thinking about folks who could grow to be those folks in terms of core faculty or adjunct faculty that you can be connected to, that you can find a community with, is an important part of the process and the journey, because you'll need them kind of when the program is done as well. So I know that, as we were wrapping up, we've talked about a lot of different spaces to get resources or how to navigate things. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you might suggest in closing that folks could and should use in terms of resources and preparing to go to grad school.
So as I previously mentioned, the program that I used to study for GRE is called Magoosh. Very helpful, very useful. It's something that only if you need to take the GRE should you look into, but definitely for individuals who want to prep and make sure they get scores that will align with the requirements, go ahead and take a look at that. One of the other things that I think is just useful is using the tools that you have at your availability. I was on the computer Googling and just looking through information, and I found a lot of useful information just by sitting there and researching, taking my time, reading through things, comparing things to one another. Because of the advent of AI, you may be pulled to try to use that. And I'd say be very thoughtful and intentional if you plan on using that, because we all know that there's sometimes, errors in the information that they can pull. And so if you are going to use that tool, make sure you're, fact checking almost, like that information that it's giving you is correct. But maybe also just use your own abilities. You're very capable. If you're going ahead and applying, we know you're capable. So go ahead and use those skills that you had from undergrad to get your research done and really give yourself as much information and leg up as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think I would just echo those things. I struggle to think about resources since it's been a while. Would have applied back in 2008, and think that on the other side, as a reviewer, I would just echo what Dr. Watkins has said in terms of using resources thoughtfully, but because you want to make sure that your voice shines through.
Yes.
And there sometimes is a cadence to other resources that makes it clear that there isn't really a voice and an authenticity in the presentation. I think also I just would want to underscore the thoughtfulness of the recommenders and giving some information to them that helps highlight what you would want to be highlighted. So again, that the application can really feel cohesive in that way. And I actually have a recommendation request template that I share with folks that ask for recommendations that maybe I'll include as part of the resources in the link, so I feel like I can make some contribution.
Yeah. I mean, and finally, just to put a little cherry on top, if you're comfortable, you can also take a look on Facebook or Instagram and see if you can find alumni groups, right? Maybe even reach out to people who are newly graduated that would be just willing to talk to you about what it is like or what to expect. But that's only if that's something you're comfortable with. If not, just research that school as much as you can and see what you can find based on what you see on those websites.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I've really appreciated kind of reflecting on this process. It doesn't happen often, except around admission season. And I think part of why we wanted to have this conversation now is admission season is coming up. And so hopefully folks will find this valuable as you get ready to submit your applications by December, January. If there are any questions that come up, feel free to drop them in the comments or send us a message where you are seeing or listening to this. And if there are any thoughts about other topics that might really be helpful for us to talk through from our unique experience, we definitely welcome those as well. So thank you so much for tuning in to Real Talk with Dr. Denise Watkins and Dr. Erika Dawkins. We are here to keep the conversations honest, healing, and rooted in the realities of our communities. And if you found today's episode meaningful, please share it with someone that you love. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can follow us on social media for updates, resources, and any behind-the-scene moments. And until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking truth, and keep doing the work. This is Real Talk. See you next time.
Thank you.